Welcome to Moving Conversations, a podcast for movement professionals by movement professionals. If you coach, train, or teach movement, Pilates, or fitness, then this podcast is for you. With more than 60 years of experience in fitness and Pilates, your hosts, Brian Ritchie and Nora St. John, explore the science of human movement, diving deep into the facts, myths, and common misconceptions, hoping to spark thought and conversation about how we view fitness and movement. Now, let's jump into Moving Conversations. And welcome back to another episode of Moving Conversations. I'm Brian Ritchie. Joining me as always is Nora St. John. How are you this morning, Nora?
Very well, thank you. We've got some visitors in town. There's a bunch of training happening over at Balanced Body, and we've got some friends from Spain here and other things. So we're having a few adventures. Yeah, it's lovely.
Very cool. I will say that's always the nice thing when you have the teacher trainer and all these people from all over the world show up. And it's really neat to meet people from all walks of life, and everybody's excited, and everybody's sort of on the same page as what we do, and this is what we love, and I think that's awesome. So I've always enjoyed it, and I can't wait to come out there next week and do my part.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian and I'll be teaching an AI 3D, Anatomy in 3 Dimensions educator training next week, so we'll be together for our next podcast.
Yeah,
in the same location.
I know. Imagine that, same location. So today we've been sort of having this, theme going on the knee over the last couple of weeks. We first covered the ACL, and then we said, well, since we talked about that, let's talk about stability. So we talked about knee stability last week. So this week we wanted to get into sort of the guts of the knee and hit a little bit about the meniscus, because we both have seen a lot of clients with meniscal tears and things of that nature. I just literally had a woman come in this morning for her first assessment who handed me, a script saying, yep, I got a meniscal tear. I was like, oh, okay, then sounds good. We're gonna talk about this. So I had a little bit of good review with her this morning as well, which is kind of nice.
Nice.
So yeah, but before we get into that, I want to remind everybody, do us a favor, hit the like, follow, subscribe, whatever platform you're on, hit those buttons for us. We really appreciate it. It helps all the algorithms. It really helps us out. And it helps get what we do out more into the population, more into hopefully other people's feeds, and might be suggested as something that they might like, so that it can, hopefully you can help turn us on to people who are like-minded. So through Instagram, we're at Moving Combos, Moving Conversations on Facebook. And if you want to get in touch with us directly, you can always email us at movingconvos@gmail.com. That's the easiest way to get in touch with us. And we answer all emails. So, and also YouTube. I got to remember to remind ourselves of that, because for those of you who are watching and seeing this live, first of all, we said this last week, for those who are in other countries, you can always use the subtitles, which is awesome. But also you can see when we use anatomical models and things like that, when we're trying to display something and explain something, it's a lot easier sometimes for us to literally show you while we're trying to explain it. So you can also, if you're listening to this in the car and you say, oh, I wonder what they're showing, you can just pull it up on your phone or whatnot and actually see it live and in action, what we're talking about. All right. So let's talk about the meniscus.
All right. So we start with, what is it?
Yeah. What is the meniscus? What's this thing called a meniscus?
And why is it called a meniscus, and everywhere else it's just kind of called cartilage?
Yeah.
Right. Because it has its own particular name, right? The meniscus.
That's
and
true.
The meniscus is inside the knee. There's two of them. There's a medial and a lateral. They are thickened cartilage. So they're a thickened band of cartilage, kind of look like half moons, like two little half moons. There we go. Kind of have an image there. That's that stuff you see there. That's just making like little round circles on top of the tibial plateau. And those are menisci. And so they do a couple of things. One, they help to deepen the joint, because otherwise it's kind of like a flat surface, a slightly rounded surface. There's no inherent integrity. So it kind of deepens the cup that the femoral heads sit into, the femoral condyles sit into. And it creates some cushioning. It creates some lubrication. So it just creates a little bit more both stability and also cushioning, and also just some strength of the whole joint.
And something that you said that I really want to sort of focus in on that most people don't realize is the amount of stability that it gives, that it literally is taking the femoral condyles, which are round, and putting them onto the tibial plateau, which is flat. So you
Yeah.
have two surfaces that normally wouldn't mate up very well together anyway. And so the top portion of the meniscus is cupped. It's holding that condyle.
Yep.
It's really holding it together and allowing, it's creating that groove so you can have that motion that as you move the knee, as you bend the knee, you're going to have that sitting in that joint. And I think that's really important for us to remember is how much stability it creates. It creates anywhere from 4 to 8% of the stability in a straightened knee position, which is pretty big. That's pretty big. That's a good amount of stability. The ACL covers over 80%, but this covers, 4 to 8%. So that's pretty good.
Yep. And it's something that, one of the things we often say, and we'll say it again, is there's this image that joints are like mashed up against each other when they're moving. And they're
Mhm.
actually not. So
Right.
the muscles actually have this concept called biotensegrity, where the muscles around any joint actually create a little bit of space, right? So they're not just jammed up against each other, but there's just a teeny bit of space there. And the meniscus helps to really provide the glide and the guidance of that roll and glide of the femur on top of the tibia. And
Which is
that's a
super important.
super important. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Really,
Yeah.
it keeps the femoral condyle kind of centered over the tibia so that you can maintain the integrity of the joint and the congruency of the joint.
Yeah. Yeah. It also provides that shock absorption. For
Yep.
years, I mean, that was the main thing when I first learned about the meniscus is it was called your shock absorber for your knee
Yep. Your
because
cushion.
it does cushion that knee upon impact. So as you jump, as you land, could you imagine if you had no meniscus and if you were literally bone on bone? And yes, there should be a little bit of space, but if you're landing on it from any height, even off of a curb, you're jumping down 6 inches and just landing, that's going to provide a lot of shock. And that's going to provide basically two bones striking each other on that cartilage. And you do that enough, you're going to wear it out. So it's super important to have that cushioning there to provide that little shock absorption as we run, walk, step, all of those things.
And one thing to always remember on these things is our bodies are kind of miraculous because many of us, right? Many of us will maintain the integrity of our meniscuses, our menisci is plural, for a lifetime. 80
Yeah.
years of walking, running, jumping, bending, squatting, moving, going up and down stairs, and that meniscus will maintain at least more or less its integrity. So that's kind of the amazing thing about the human body is it really does regenerate and it really develops these structures that the body then uses for decades literally,
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes without trouble. Now there can be trouble there but not always, and it's really is something that for a lot of people will last their whole lifetime.
And if you think about it, every joint in the human body, the more wear and tear you put on it, you're going to have wear and tear at those joints. You're going to have a little bit of more, I hate to use the word damage, but just wear and tear. If you use a car a lot, you put a couple 100,000 miles on it, you're going to have issues to some of the substructures. That's just normal. And the same thing. So we see in our athletes, we're going to see a lot more wear and tear than the casual person who might play occasional golf or tennis or walks on a regular basis as their exercise and may work out some. They're going to have a little less wear and tear, and for those people especially, that knee may last their entire lifetime without an issue, especially if they don't have osteoarthritis in their family. So that joint, it can last a lifetime.
One other thing I like to mention too is depending on the alignment of the knee. Like when Brian and I work on anybody with a lower limb injury, whether it's hip, knee, or ankle or foot, we spend a lot of time working on alignment and just trying
Yeah.
to maximize or optimize the alignment between all those joints. And with the knee, if you have what's called a steep Q angle or your knock knees or your bow-legged, right, that means that that tibia and that femur are meeting at a slightly different angle, and you'll have more stress. So typically
Mhm.
with knock knees, you'll have a little bit more stress on the lateral side of the lateral meniscus, right? Kind of see that. There we go. Brian's increasing that Q angle. You see that? And if you're bow-legged, you'll have a little more stress potentially on the medial meniscus. So this is why we spend so much time in both of our sessions, I know, working on just trying to get that alignment as good as it can be. There's
Mhm.
always structural issues. There's always limitations there potentially, but just trying to optimize that and trying to optimize it not just in static posture, but in movement. So when somebody's bending their knees and doing a squat or doing footwork on the reformer, we're trying to really give them that opportunity to align that as best as possible, to spread out the load through that joint as much as possible and through the meniscus as much as possible.
When you have someone who is knock-kneed or bow-legged, some of that is structural. And no matter how much you want to focus on that,
Mm.
you're not going to change it. But you want to optimize what they've got. You want to take what they
Exactly.
have and make sure you optimize what they have so that they are tracking as good as possible.
Right.
So in a bent knee position, they're not going to have the same, obviously the Q angle is going to change because they're now in a bent knee position. So you want to just make sure that they have equal pressure as much as possible. That joint congruity is going to be equal between the lateral and medial sides as much as you can.
As much as you can. Exactly. And that's always, that's always a depending on the body in front of you.
Everything is depending on the body in front of you. Absolutely.
Things can vary depending on that. Yeah. So thinking about the meniscus in terms of use, one of the things that I always think about with the meniscus is all the work that we do. So I'm going to talk two ways. One, yes, work in terms of things like squats and walking and moving and flexing and extending the knee can cause wear and tear. They also cause stimulation. And sometimes that stimulation is beneficial over time to the meniscus. So it's one of
Mhm.
those things where, yes, too much can cause some wear and tear, cause it to break down or cause an injury. But without stimulation, it doesn't stay as healthy as it could be. So there's always that line that we walk a lot when we talk about resiliency, when we talk about aging, when we talk about time, is there's always the balance there between not moving too much and moving too much and not moving at all.
Mhm.
And where are we in that? And how much movement is appropriate for keeping that joint healthy?
Yeah. And that's, I mean, you and I have talked about this. We got into it last year a lot when we talked about the fascia. If you don't use it, you're going to lose it. So we need to keep the joint lubricated. We need to keep it moving. We need to keep these, structures happy and well oiled. If you don't use a machine for a long time, whatever it is, it's going to freeze up on you. It's not going to work as well. And you're going to have to, you might have to take it apart one day and put it back together. Well, same thing happens with our bodies. The less we use it, we may be preserving it to a certain degree, but we're also not optimizing what that joint can do or what the body can do. So the right amount of movement, the right amount of exercise, and the proper um, movement is so important. I look at my kids and they can do just about anything. You ask, running, jumping, twisting, turning, pivoting, twisting, all of this kind of stuff, and nothing ever about it. It's awesome. You try and do that with a 50-year-old, and you might have a little bit of difference in, their recovery and how their body feels afterwards. Not everybody. Some people snap back real fast. Other people may need a little bit, especially if they're not used to those movements. So again, the body in front of you is the one that you're going to be working with, or your own body. Looking in the mirror,
Depending.
the body.
The body in front of you in either case.
Yeah.
One of the things that I also say though about the meniscus is I've worked with a ton of people with meniscus injuries, and
Oh yeah.
many of them, if they get strong enough in their quads or hamstrings, inner and outer thigh, the knee stability, a lot of what we talked about last week, actually,
Yep.
that can minimize the pain and discomfort from the meniscus. I've had a lot of clients who have a meniscus tear and it just doesn't bother them as long as they
Yep.
really maintain the strength and balance of, all around the knee. So it's one of those things where, an ACL tear, which we talked about, a couple weeks ago, an ACL tear, if it's really a complete tear, it will disrupt significantly the biomechanics and the ability of the body to do what it needs to do, and will
Yep.
really require sort of constant vigilance to keep it together. The meniscus, maintaining relative alignment, decent alignment, good strength, you can often manage a meniscus issue for a long time and sometimes forever, but certainly for a considerable period of time if you really keep alignment and strength in mind.
Yeah. Story that I tell in a lot of my classes when I teach about the knee is what happened to my meniscus. At my very first conference that I ever went to, ideal world, I think it was 1993, my very first one. I had just gotten into being a personal trainer and a group exercise instructor, and I took my first class, first day. It was a kickboxing class. And this was before Taibo and any of that stuff. So nobody really knew what they were doing. It was just something for fun. And anybody who's ever been to a fitness conference or anybody who's ever been into a ballroom realizes those floors are not made for exercise. They're carpeted and not the best carpeting. So either the instructor didn't say it or I didn't hear it, but I did not pivot my foot to the side as I tried to do a roundhouse kick. So I went up into a roundhouse kick with my leg planted, toes facing forward, and I heard a pop, and I went down like a sack of potatoes. My knee swelled up immediately. And of course, I'm young and I'm dumb and I don't baby it for the next 3 days. I still try and do all the classes that I want to do at the conference. And I tore that thing apart. And that was the first time I ever experienced that sort of level of joint pain. And it was intense. And it probably took about 6 or 8 months for it to calm down. I didn't have medical insurance, so I never got it checked out. But, over time, it seemed to heal. And it probably was a meniscal tear based on everything that I learned later, because 10 years later, maybe 15 years later, whatever it was, I was with a client. And if anybody who's ever been injured will know this feeling. I squatted down to be with this client on the floor. And as I squatted down, something didn't quite feel right in my knee. It didn't hurt, but it was like, that doesn't feel right. So I thought, okay. And I'm working with a client and I go to stand up and she said it sounded like I stepped out a bag of potato chips.
God.
And I couldn't put weight on my leg. I immediately knew something was wrong. I could not. And of course, I'm no selling it. No, I'm fine. And as I'm hobbling, I go into the office. Luckily, I've got physician friends. I call up, get in to see someone, and an MRI later. And I'm told, at first he said, you got a meniscal tear, Garen. I've seen this a million times. You probably won't need surgery. Let's get the MRI. Then he gets the MRI and he says, how's Tuesday for surgery? He said, it's a really bad one. He said, you probably had this. And I told him the story of how this occurred. And he said, oh yeah, that's when you started it. And over the years, said, you didn't baby it. You've been a very active person. You probably kept, opening it up. And eventually sometimes this can happen. And again, I did not baby it. I was very active on those knees. So, and I was also a baseball catcher throughout my childhood. So, squatted position for, long periods of time. Again, but that was sort of my progression. So I went a long time with a small meniscal tear, 15 years, with no problems at all. And it wasn't until that right motion, and had I not squatted down with that client at that time and who knows if it ever would have reared its ugly head. But at that one moment, I opened it up enough and caused, that issue. So you can go a long period of time with a meniscal tear and not have any issues whatsoever. And as soon as your body heals, and when I say the word heal, we're going to get into a little bit more about the meniscus and healing in a minute, but it doesn't necessarily heal, but swelling can come down. You can begin to strengthen, like you said, balancing right to left, medial, lateral, anterior, posterior. And it doesn't bother you after a while. The swelling goes down and everything seems to be happy. And that can stay that way for a long time, perhaps the rest of your life.
So one of the things that I often say, like if a client comes in with a meniscus tear or meniscus trouble, is I always say, as you said this many times, Brian, give me a couple of months to see what we can do in terms of strength, in terms of mobility, in terms of alignment, getting your swelling down. And let's see if we can just manage it through strength and through kind of training. And very often you can. Again, in your case, it took a while, but very, very often you can. And if you can't, the good news there is if they go into a meniscus repair surgery with strength, they're going to do so much better on the backside. And that's also been my experience is the clients who, really didn't do anything before their surgeries. They were deconditioned anyway. They're swelling all the time. They really weren't using that knee. And then they have surgery. It took them so much longer to recover than those who really kind of did the work, did the prehab, and then had the surgery, it's like, okay, boom, life is back to normal pretty quickly.
Yeah, it does. It happens so much faster when you're in shape, when you are strong, when those quads are strong and you've got good balance, especially
Yeah.
medial to lateral.
Yep.
When that medial
Yep.
quad and lateral quad, we talked about this last week in stability, when those are firing well together, you can snap back from this a lot faster,
Yep.
And you and I have worked with people who deconditioned, have the surgery, and it's 6 to 8 months.
Yep.
And they still are going to be complaining about it a little bit. It's not 100%. It doesn't feel quite right. And the other client who, after a month, they're already doing things. You're thinking, yeah, I don't know if you should be doing that, but they say, I feel great.
Yeah,
I feel
exactly.
fine.
Yeah.
So yeah. Let's get into a little bit more of the actual structure of the meniscus, because I used the word healing a minute ago. Okay, I used the word healing, and something that I found fascinating when I first dove into the meniscus was that the meniscus, part of it can heal, but part of it can't. And much like cartilage, because it's a type of cartilage, it's a fibrocartilage, only a certain portion, the outer rim, has any vascularity, has any blood flow. It's the only part that has the potential to really heal itself. That sort of red zone, so to speak, versus the white zone, which is the center, which is avascular, which, you take a chunk out of that or you do damage to that, you're not going to get the repair that you would if it happened to something that had some vascularization.
Right, and which makes a real big difference in terms of how they're dealing with it surgically, and also just in terms of the potential outcome.
Yeah.
Because if it's in the red area, there is some healing that can happen. I mean, it can remodel, the tissues can get nourished in such a way that healing can happen.
Yep.
The white tissue is more like, I don't know, what would you say? It's just tissue.
Well,
It's tissue without a lot of life force, right? It's
well,
structure
exactly.
without quite so much structure, so much vascularity, so much ability for nutrients, etc., to get into the situation and really create new tissue.
Yeah. When you and I were talking before this, and I explained a diagram that I had found, which actually showed the different layers of the meniscus, and how the topmost layer is actually almost like a plastic. It's really smooth, and that's the part, especially when it gets damaged, that it gets cut into, that when exposed, you're exposing the bone underneath, because the cushioning isn't necessarily, the closer you get into the middle of the knee joint, it gets thinner. The meniscus gets thinner and thinner. And that's where it's a little bit more like plastic. It's very smooth in comparison to some of the other part that has more compression to it. And when you damage that, you're really not going to get any repair. Basically, they're going to go in, they're just going to cut around it so that it doesn't tear itself more. So like a run in a stocking.
Or get rid of a chunk that's floating about, right? They just they trim it, basically.
They trim it.
So that if there's anything that's floating or anything that's loose, they kind of get rid of those bits. But they're not necessarily going to, yeah.
And when I had mine, there's multiple different types of tears, and they all have their different names. But my surgeon actually said, hopefully it'll be a red tear. It'll be on the outer edge, and we'll be able to go in. He said it'll take 2 sutures. He said it's a fast surgery. I see it. I put the 2 ends together. I put 2 sutures there, maybe 3. You're non-weight bearing for 8 weeks, which I thought that's going to kill me. How am I going to be not weight bearing? I need to do exercise. I need to work out. Little did I know, he said, but he told me that one will heal, and your meniscus will, I'm not going to say it's as good as new, but it's as good as it's going to be, because it will heal.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's in the center, if it's a white one, he said, look, we're going to go in, we're going to trim around the area. We're going to clean it up so it doesn't want to tear anymore. And then you've got what you got. And and depending on how big it is, depending on what's going on, he said, if you don't modify what you do, he said, that can lead to, a knee replacement sooner than if you hadn't had the meniscus damage, because you're exposing bone to cartilage, bone to bone eventually.
Right. So thinking about the meniscus is the cushion, right? Is the barrier, if you will, between those bones attaching to each other. So if you do lose some of that cushion, if they actually have to take out some of the meniscus and it's not going to heal back, then again, you just have more bone to bone connection, which can over time lead to an increase in osteoarthritis, which can then lead to degeneration in various ways. And just not to put too fine a point on it, anytime you open up a joint, it increases the likelihood of osteoporosis. I mean,
Yeah.
osteoarthritis.
Right.
So
Yep.
just disturbing a joint will often, it just, whatever it does, it just encourages little osteophyte formation and other kinds of things to get irritated.
Yeah. And you have to figure that whenever they're cutting into that, they're trimming it out, they're actually going to be scraping the bone a little bit, which stimulates that bone. So we're asking the bone to be stimulated in certain ways. So bone spurs are a little more likely to occur at the site,
Yep.
just because we're disturbing it.
Yeah.
And then the femur is hitting that, and those edges now probably aren't as smooth as they once were because you've taken away that smooth slide and glide. So now you're constantly sort of hitting the cartilage of the femur over and over again. And it's, repetition upon repetition over the next 10, 15 years, whatever it is, you may wear away sort of that cartilage on the femur, which then can expose the bone. And that's when you hear the term bone on bone, where that cartilage gets worn away and more osteoarthritis begins to grow oftentimes. And that's when, you have that bone on bone that needs a knee replacement, etc.
Okay. So we've just walked from healthy, happy knee to like trauma. We've gone down the rabbit hole. And again, I just want to bring it back because meniscus is not in many cases is not that major, right? And I really want to de-dramatize this.
Yep.
I don't want to really pull us back from that feeling like, oh my God, I've got a meniscus tear.
No.
Yeah, sometimes it's a bad deal, and sometimes it's a major thing. And but to Brian's point, and I'm thinking of another friend of ours who just had surgery. It was in the red zone. So yes, he had like 2 months when he really couldn't do anything with that knee, allowing it to heal. He wasn't allowed to weight bear, wasn't allowed to do anything till that healing happened. But now he's like back playing soccer and back doing his full workouts and all that. So, so even with post a repair, that can often be, again, it can take a while to recover, but particularly if it's a red tear, it takes longer to recover. But a lot of times you come right back to fully functional. It's not like the ACL, which sometimes leaves some deficits. It's usually can be pretty successful that way.
And think of something to think about. My surgery on my meniscus, I had a bucket handle tear, and he said he removed probably 40% of my meniscus because it was that bad of a tear. And his words to me were, if you don't modify what you do and take your rehab seriously, he knew what I did for a living. He said, you know what you're doing? If you take your rehab seriously and you modify what you're doing, so you don't increase more wear and tear than you need to, like a lot of running and things like that, joint impact. He said, you're going to be fine for a while and you may never need a knee replacement. I haven't had knee pain since the surgery. That knee is stronger than my other knee, to be honest, because I took the rehab very seriously, modified my habits. Again, one of the contraindications for either if you or a client has it is you don't want to have a lot of impact. You don't want to increase the amount of jarring. So he said, look, stop playing basketball, stop running. Those two things will preserve the life of your knee. And again, I don't want this to be doom and gloom. I haven't had any issues with that knee in the last 15 or 17 years. It's been fine. And hopefully, knock on wood, I'm not going to have a knee replacement because again, I'm keeping it happy. I'm keeping it healthy. So again, either without the surgery or post-surgery, you can really, have no issues with your knee. But to your comment earlier, you need to work it right. We need to stabilize the joint.
Yeah.
You need to make sure you're balancing out, the medial and the lateral quad so that there's even wear and tear. Yeah. Keep the strength up, keep the stability up so that the joint wants to work properly. That's so important.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, another example, my sister had a meniscus tear and repair. My sister's now 72. Okay. when she was 20-ish.
Hmm.
And then basically, danced, has done gyros, done Pilates, has done lots and lots and lots of active things. And now she's been a tango dancer for the last like 3 or 4 years.
Hmm.
And now she's finally going like, okay, I think I might need a knee replacement now. And she also had an ACL tear. She had ACL reconstruction on that same knee. So, but that's 50
50
years
years.
of pretty functional stuff.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and really the main reason she's doing a knee replacement now, which I thought was just interesting, was we had a long talk about it. And it's kind of like, she isn't sure she absolutely needs it now, but her feeling was, I'm going to recover a whole lot better
Oh, yeah.
now than I would in 5 or 10 years.
Yep.
And so, so yes, like I may not really need it exactly right now. Like I could probably put it off for 3 or 4 years, but by then it's just going to potentially take me longer to recover, and I may
Hmm.
not recover as well. So I thought
Yep.
that's great. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So 50 years of functioning after that, that's pretty good. And for you too, it's been many, many years.
Yeah.
So that's a good
And
thing.
and that's the important thing, is to remember that, and we've talked about this in the past, but I think it's good for us to reiterate. When you're talking to a physician, and the client that I had this morning, basically she handed me an MRI from 2016 about her low back and said, oh yeah, it says I have a herniation. The doctor said, oh, I'm probably going to have a disc replacement, and all of this kind of stuff. And I said, when's the last time your back hurt? She goes, 5 years ago. I said, you're fine. I said, you strengthened, and we're going to strengthen more. Doctors look very black and white at issues like this. And for
Yep.
them, a lot of times they are looking at it from their lens of, I
Yep.
can solve this, and I'm going to
Yep.
solve it with surgery most of the time. Not always, but most of the time. Same thing with her meniscal tear. The doctor said, yeah, if we can't we're going to have to. And I said, how bad does your knee hurt right now? She goes, it doesn't at all. I said, then you're okay. We just have to strengthen you properly. And when I did her assessment, I saw there's a lot of lateral tracking in that knee and things like that. I said, oh, well, you're not balanced here. Your medial quad is very weak compared to the lateral. I said, we just need to start shoring that up a little bit. I said, and see where this goes. But right now you have no knee pain. So I said, so why don't you put the thought of surgery on the back burner?
Yeah.
Because I don't think you're going to need it unless this gets a whole lot worse.
Yeah.
And you could see the anxiety suddenly calm down. She goes, oh, really? And I said, yeah, if you're not in pain, relax for a moment. Okay. They're looking at it through their lens. Let's us look at it through the lens of, give us some time. Let's strengthen. Let's see if you'll ever need it. And hopefully you won't.
And what's your experience? I mean, is the knee a problem for you? Not right now.
Not
Is your
now.
back a problem for you? Not right now. If it's not a problem, don't go do something that will cause a problem.
Bingo.
Surgery is not nothing.
Right.
Surgeons always make it sound like they're a car mechanic. They go in, they replace the part, and you're good to go. That is not the experience of most people after any kind of surgery.
No.
Right? Just
No.
not. That's not really quite how the body works. And it may be, they may have a good outcome or not, but it's kind of like, that's not the deal. And again, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you're able to do everything you want to do, keep doing that unless there's some obvious reason not to, or you're obviously going to cause more damage. One of the things that I ran into when I was working with a friend of mine with some low back pain was she said, no, I've got chronic low back pain. I'm like, okay, how long have you had low back pain for? She's like, oh, like the last 12 years or something like that. It was a long time. And I said, okay, well, does your back hurt now? She said, no. I said, okay, when was the last time your back hurt? Well, I had a little flare up about 6 months ago. I said, for how long? I said, oh, a couple of days, 3 or 4 days. I was kind of in pain. I said, okay, you don't have chronic low back pain.
You have occasional low back pain.
You have occasional or acute recurring low back pain, right? Which bugs
Yeah.
you every now and then because you did whatever you did. But you don't have chronic low back pain. It doesn't hurt you every day. It doesn't hurt you even all that much. And I think that to your point, I call it the curse of the medical professional. Like, you have this and you feel like you've got the scarlet letter A on you, or you've got the scarlet letter disc on you, like, I'm a disc client. And there's been so much research that really says 2 things. One, that whatever that MRI was, it was a moment in time. It was that moment in time. And particularly for the low back meniscus, I'm not sure they change all that much, but for the low back, like it can look completely different 3 weeks later.
Yep.
Just because things are in a different place and they take that MRI. So anyway,
Yep.
just a reminder. I think that's a good reminder.
Yeah. I think so many people, I think this is human nature. Something's wrong. My knee hurts. I want to know why my knee hurts.
Yes.
So they go
I want
in.
explanation. Yeah.
I want an explanation, and that's human nature. We want the
Yes.
explanation.
Absolutely. I know why.
But with that explanation, as you've sold many times, it becomes their story.
Yeah.
Because now I have a meniscal tear.
Yes.
Oh,
Or I am a meniscal tear.
oh, I am exactly. I've
Right.
heard
I
that.
mean, there's no identifying with it.
Exactly. And then when you really dig in and say, but your knee hasn't bothered you for 2 years. Oh, okay. Well, we could go another 5, 10, 20 without ever having knee pain, possibly. Who knows? The
Right.
future is still out there.
Yes.
But all I can deal with is the knee I see in front of me and the body I see in front of me. So guess what? We're going to train that. And we're going to keep it on the back burner of my mind. Mentally, I'm going to have it sort of, okay, there are certain contraindications. Again, I may not want this person to do high impact unless that's what they want to do, and then they know the consequences. Then I'm just going to say, okay, certain exercises are out, but there's 10 million exercises to choose from. Maybe these small amount I can't do. But I have all of this other stuff I can do. So do that. Tons of ways to strengthen the body.
For example, I can't tell you how many of my friends who are getting older-ish, and they were runners. Like I think of one of the docs I used to work with, right? He was a serious runner. I mean, he ran like crazy, 50-mile runs and that kind of thing. And he got to the point where his knees really just weren't happy about it anymore. He'd have a lot of swelling after a run. He was doing everything right, but the knees were just tired.
Sure.
And he still wanted to work out. So he went to biking. Right? Because biking is less, it's not impact. You're still working the knee, you're still stimulating the knee, but it's less impact. And then he continued biking for the next 15 years. Right. So sometimes it's just like, what do you want to do? What can you modify? How can you still stay as active as you want to stay, but maybe just changing what you do or how you do it instead of just, stopping entirely.
I've got a buddy who basically did a similar thing. He had knee problems, yes, but he also had a severe arthritic big toe. And he was a big time runner, but he also owned his own gym. So guess what he did? He bought one of those treadmills called an Alter G, which actually you put on, it basically lifts your body up. So you can adjust the amount of gravitational force that you're putting on the treadmill through air. And so he bought one and he said, I want to keep running. He gets a runner's high. He's one of those people.
Yeah.
I've never experienced it, but I believe him. And he loves to do it. He said, this will give me 5 to 10 more years of running. So you know what? That's what I'm going to do. Good on you. He found a way to modify what he loved to do. Your doctor, he went into cycling and probably enjoyed it as much or nearly, and found passion that protected his knee for another period of time.
Exactly. Exactly.
Which is fantastic.
So thinking about, how you work with the meniscus, there's a couple of things I want to talk about. One is there can be a mobility. Well, first thing I was talking about swelling. So a lot of times with a meniscus tear, you're dealing with swelling, and swelling is problematic, partly because it can cause as much trouble, like it can be the problem itself at a certain point. Right. So with the knee, and I found chronic swelling after meniscus stuff is really common. And that will really cause as much discomfort in the knee as whatever the original injury was, I find a lot of times. So managing swelling is something that I always have to work with that. And it may be they wear a sleeve. It may be, if it's appropriate for them, they take anti-inflammatories. It maybe they keep their knee up at night. All kinds of ways just to keep the fluid from building up in there, because the fluid builds up in there. It changes kind of the biomechanics of the joint because it just puts more fluid in a place there shouldn't be fluid. Means oftentimes the joint is less stable because it's just kind of all full of water. So managing swelling is one of the first things that I work with a lot with clients with that. And it's not my job entirely, but with their PT or with their doctor, what are the ways we can really manage swelling for this client? Because that's a big deal.
It's a huge deal.
Yeah, and sometimes I find that's more the problem than the actual injury to a certain extent. Because if we can get the swelling managed, often the pain will go down enough so that they can continue on and keep their strengthening up and make progress.
They also say that there's a certain point, a tipping point with the swelling in the knee, that you
Yeah,
get to a certain point, a certain number of cc's, and I've heard anywhere from 6 to 8 to 10, that that number begins to shut down the quadricep. The quad's not going to
exactly.
fire as
Yep,
much. So again, you said it alters the biomechanics, not just the way it moves, but also what muscles are firing and able to function. So that
yep.
swelling can also, cause atrophy within the quadricep muscle.
Yeah, yeah. So thinking about that, and again, that's not usually your job as a teacher, as a coach or a Pilates teacher or a personal trainer, but that's something to really have them work with their PT or their doctor about to try to
Hmm.
really work on the swelling. And maybe it's a sleeve, maybe it's compression stuff, maybe it's anti-inflammatories, maybe it's there's all kinds of techniques they use for that. But that's something to think about. And then the second thing really is I just strengthen the legs within an inch of their life, whatever they can
Hmm.
tolerate. So a lot of times the meniscus tear, I've got to limit their flexion. So I'm going to be strengthening them in flexion, but maybe I limit that range. So on the
Hmm.
reformer, for example, I adjust the carriage so that it's farther away from the foot bar. So they're still getting some knee flexion, but they're not getting into a deep range of motion that may be causing them discomfort. All right. So managing range of motion there. Managing resistance too. So maybe again, too much resistance causes irritation, but if I keep it light enough, then they can get the movement through. Because one other thing is movement, even with swelling, can actually help to pump some of the fluid out
Yes.
if you don't overdo it, right? There's a fine line there, but if you can find that line for them, knowing that if they do it on, let's say 2 red springs on the reformer with their footwork, and they only do, let's say 30 reps of various different foot positions, they're fine. If they do more than that, their swelling increases. Like paying attention to those things
Yep.
makes a big difference. I also then work a lot, as we talked about, the knee stability on abductors and adductors and hamstrings, and just trying to get really three-dimensional support around the knee. And
Hmm.
also looking at that vastus medialis, vastus lateralis balance around the patella to make sure that it's tracking as efficiently as possible, because that will also irritate the knee.
The knee tracking is always going to be so important. Uh, the medialis, we find that anytime there is swelling in the knee, the vastus medialis oblique, the BMO, they have a tendency to not work as strongly.
It
Sometimes
goes
they
to
go to
sleep
sleep. Yeah.
immediately. They just fail.
Yep. So that causes additional knee tracking issues. So waking that up, making sure that it's firing. And again, that should be done before they get to us. Should. Hopefully
Yeah.
the physical therapist has woken it up and they're well on their way so that we can just continue the process with what we're doing. The things that I find work best for my meniscus people, first of all, isometric. So things like straight leg raises, because I can keep them in a straight legged position. Okay. Working isometrically on the ranges of motion, or having them work through the ranges of motion that aren't in pain. So let's
Right.
say they
Exactly.
have pain at between 40 and 30 degrees of knee extension. Well, guess what? I can train up to that point and
Yep.
I can train
And
beyond that
the
point.
other side of that point. Yep.
Yeah. And eventually, hopefully, I can get that whole thing, that bridge can occur between the two areas. And it
Mhm.
often does. I'd say almost every time that bridging will occur. And suddenly they're able to do that full range of motion over time. Now, I will say this one thing to consider, especially after knee surgery for meniscus. I've seen a number of people come in, and we see this also with people who have had joint replacements, but especially meniscus tears. They can't fully straighten out their knee. Okay, they get to a certain point where they're missing that last 5 degrees, and especially if they don't have insurance or maybe not enough insurance, and they leave physical therapy and they haven't gotten it yet. Working on what we call that terminal knee extension, that last few degrees, that last 30 degrees, especially though the last 5 or 10 degrees, so they can at least get that knee straight, can be very important.
Really
Can be
important.
very important.
Yep.
And one exercise that I give, and I'll give this to you guys now, is I just have them lie down on their stomach and I put a foam roller or a bolster or something under their ankle. And I just say, straighten out your legs. So their knee that's resting on the ground or on the mat table will lift up off the ground. So they're doing that terminal knee extension without any resistance. It's just gravity against their knee joint. And they can work and gradually 20, 30, 40, 50 reps, whatever they're comfortable with, that's not causing any increased inflammation, that's not causing any increased irritability, have them do that. And what I found is over time, we're getting that straighter and straighter and straighter in a
Nice.
passive way, that they're not doing, leg extension type movements that might increase a lot of discomfort, or even a standing terminal knee extension where they've got a lot of compression on the joint. This is a
Right.
little bit more passive, and I find it works really well to get that last few degrees range of motion.
Nice. Passive and open chain.
Yes,
Right.
yes,
So as a modification for that, just I'm thinking about what you're saying. So if they're prone on the floor, and that means their hip has to be in some extension when they're going to that terminal knee extension, right? Because they're
yes,
prone and then they're right. So just thinking about some of my clients with very little hip extension, right? I might put them up like on a box or something. Put
yep,
them on something, or even just a mats padded up or something, so
yep,
that they're actually starting with hip flexion.
yep,
And even if, and again, they can bend their knee and then just straighten it out. I'm just thinking of a modification for those I know who don't have good hip extension.
yep.
Yeah.
Or a
Yeah.
ball,
Nice. Or a
or,
ball, something. Yeah.
whatever. And like I say, it's just an easy way that you can do it passively
And open
and
chain. You're not
in
getting the
open chain.
compression.
Yeah, you're not going to get that compression.
Nice.
So that can help. And I have not had a single person. Now, again, this is anecdotal. I've seen hundreds probably of meniscal tears in my career. This has always been okay.
Nice.
But you're always
Nice.
going to have one or two people that may get some irritability. Talk to their doctor. Find what works for them, But in general, that seems to be one that really does work for that meniscal tear.
Awesome. Awesome. That's
Yeah.
very cool.
So,
Yeah.
so
The other thing I work on a lot is the lower leg as well, as I work on balance
mhm,
of the hamstring. So, playing with the lower leg rotation, but also just working on calf strength and dorsiflexion strength, because I find
yep,
that those also will kind of go to sleep if the meniscus is problematic. And sometimes I also look at when did the meniscal tear happen? Like sometimes somebody doesn't really know. They've just been doing their life for a long time, and so their knee starts to hurt and swell, and it's not super painful, but just swelling and it's irritated, and it ends up being a meniscus thing.
off and
Like
on.
yeah, kind of a gradual something
Yep,
funky. Other times it's, oh yeah, I was skiing and I went down, and my ski was here and my knee was there, and I got a torque injury, and like, okay, that's a little more traumatic. So it's also
yep,
good to know like where it came from, because in my clients where it wasn't an obvious traumatic injury that caused it, then I've really got to look at what are their mechanics. Like if their mechanics are causing that amount of wear and tear, that's what I've got to work on. Strength, balance, mechanics of the knee, mobility, strength in the lower leg. Like I've got to really work on that. If it's more
yep,
of a traumatic situation, especially in a client who is pretty strong, but just had some kind of a trauma there, it's just a little bit different. Like I'm still going to do all the same things, but I may find I need to really work on, for example, stabilizing the knee, because that rotational component was really, kind of disturbed some things. So I may need to work specifically on some things that derotate the knee or stabilize the knee or really keep them parallel for a while.
yep.
Other kinds of little tidbits there.
Yeah. And something to also think about in going along with that, people who it is recurring, it's something that happens.
Yeah.
I will often ask, is there something specific? Is there a time of year that it
Hmm.
happens most often? Because I often see it with my gardeners,
Yep.
because suddenly, springtime happens and they're in the garden, they're planting bulbs, they're in a squatted position, they're
Yeah.
on the
For
ground
hours. For
for
hours.
hours, and they don't think about it, but that's a lot of knee compression for a long period of time
Yep.
that they haven't done for a period of time. They haven't
Yes.
done it all winter,
Yes.
and
Right.
now they're doing that for a whole weekend. And
Yep.
suddenly they have inflammation that lasts a month or whatever, 2 weeks,
Yeah.
whatever it does for them. And as we get older, we may not have the same amount of flexibility in our knee that we had when we were in our 20s, but we still ask our bodies to do the same thing when it hasn't done it for the last 6 months. And you may have some of that. So trying to figure out what their activities were that created that. And that's going to cue me in as well for next year. okay, I need to sort of prep that because I know this person, they've got a huge garden. They're not going to stop doing this. So let's make sure that I'm going to, like I prepare people for skiing, prepare people for golfing. I'm going to start preparing them for gardening. So I'm going to
Yep.
say, okay, I may have them go a little deeper into their squats as long as it doesn't irritate them on their leg press or on the reformer where they can get their hips a little bit deeper, into the squat, just so we get a little bit more of that knee bend so that they get comfortable with it and their knees hopefully can gain some strength in areas that maybe it hasn't for a while in that range of motion.
And again, you're an East Coaster. I'm a West
Yes.
Coaster. I'm in California. So
But I'm
it just
thinking
is
about it from the East Coast
right.
point of view.
Yeah, exactly. So you do have, and we talked about this in terms of one of our podcasts, like about, preparing for like activities in the summer and the spring.
Yep.
In here, there's definitely skiing. There's winter sports, which we have to prepare people for because there is no winter
Yep.
here. And a lot of times people are going to go up and they're going to ski for 1 week in Colorado, right? And that's it. And that's all they do all
Yep.
year. So we've got to kind of prep them for that. But other stuff tends to be more, full year round. Biking and cycling certainly are all year round. There's no change in the seasons there generally, or not much. So in that case, I'm looking at, okay, did you just increase your mileage? Are you, it's like it's spring, so you're out for longer, or it's winter and now you have time off from work or whatever it is, right? So just looking at kind of what they're doing and how they're changing their habits or their, I'm training for a run, or I'm training for a century or whatever I'm doing.
Yep.
And just being aware of what they're doing in terms of their activity level.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to make mention is the hamstrings.
Yep.
Something that people don't realize is that the posterior side of the knee, where the hamstrings actually connect into the lower leg, okay, fascially, you have some connection between the medial meniscus and the hamstring. Okay, so there are times when people want to increase their flexibility on their hamstrings, and they have an angry meniscus or a post-surgical meniscus, and they're stretching the heck out of their hamstrings. It sometimes can irritate by pulling on that meniscus from the backside.
Good. Yep.
So for those clients, what I will do is allow them to bend their knee a little bit during the hamstring stretch. So they're not getting that extreme extension in the knee.
That pull right behind the knee. Yeah, good.
Yeah, it'll take the stretch from the knee and pull it down more into the belly of the muscle a little bit and just take pressure off the backside of the knee. I find that 90% of the time, 99% of the time, in fact, that eliminates the pull on the meniscus. So just something to keep in mind when you're working with those clients. If they complain about it, bend the knee during the hamstring stretching just a little bit.
Nice. There's something a little, I'm not sure if this will work on video, but there's something that I played with that I learned from Eve Gentry or somebody at some conference somewhere. And basically it was creating a little bit of space around the knee. So it kind of opens up the knee joint. And sometimes I've had, for a few clients, this has been like a game changer, just to decompress the knee gently. So all you do basically is bring your knee up. I'm showing it on YouTube, but you can't really see it. But basically I take my knee and I put I hug it into my chest and I put my arm behind it. So like, I'm trying to show this on YouTube here, right? So here's my leg, just have my hand like this. And then I just bend my knee in like this. Or you could put a roller there, you could put a pool noodle there, you could put a pillow there. But I'm just doing something. And all it does is very, very gently open up the knee joint. Yep. And there have been a few clients with meniscus issues and other kinds of issues where that has brings about a lot of relief. And then also it seems to just ease up some swelling and other issues. So anyway, a little something to think about.
I've seen that done, especially with the pool noodle or a half a pool noodle.
Yeah,
because you can put it there and just pulling in will open that joint up just a little bit. I have seen that with people, I usually see it with people lying on their back, and they put it under there and they pull their ankle as close as they can. And then because they've got it trapped on the ground, they can just stay there. Yeah. So I have seen that. So that does work really well. Yeah. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, and I don't use it much, but I remember a few times I've used it. It's been like just a game changer for people. The other thing too that does, and this is a different issue in terms of meniscus stuff, but sometimes clients are very, very tight in their quadriceps. And basically, if you see something with patellofemoral dysfunction or chondromalacia patella, where that patella is really pulled down into that groove, that will sometimes just provide a little bit of more mobility. for the tendon, the patellar tendon or the patellar ligament, depending how you talk about it, the attachment of the quadriceps through the patella onto the tibia. It creates a little bit of a stretch into those tissues, which sometimes can just keep that patella from floating so deeply in there and decrease some stress and compression in that joint.
Nice.
It's a small thing, but I found it to be occasionally like a magic moment. So, sharing a little bit of a magic moment that works for some people.
Very cool and very practical.
Yeah.
Something that you can do. Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I think we covered a lot with the meniscus today.
We did. How it works, surgeries,
Yep.
what to do, why it happens, and then some tips and tricks at the end. And again, I would recommend people also go back to our knee stability
Yeah,
podcast, which
last
was
week's.
last week's, for a
Yep.
lot of tips on things that are really helpful for the meniscus. Because
Yeah.
those things are anyway, a lot of them. We brought a few more things in, but a lot of those are quite relevant to meniscus tears as well.
Well, yeah, last week we did a lot of practical movement. We did a lot of exercises that we shared. And this week we shared quite a bit of tips and tricks, but that's going to help with the balancing, especially when you have someone who has had any type of knee surgery, whether it be, total joint replacement or a meniscus or an ACL. They're going to have that swelling. They're going to have those issues. They're probably going to have tracking issues. They're probably, that medialis is not going to be as strong as the lateralis. So all of those tips and tricks that we talk about in the knee stability can be used on all post-surgical knees as well.
And also even pre-surgical knees.
And pre-surgical,
right?
absolutely.
Right. Injured knees that aren't surgery yet, sort of prehabbing.
Yeah, I will say this, and we'll say it many times. Prehab is the key for recovery on almost every client I've had. You get them 6 months before they go in for a replacement or any type of surgery. And oh my gosh, they snap back so much faster, much faster. It's a game changer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you guys very much for joining us again for Moving Conversations. Hopefully you learned a lot about the knee and a lot about the meniscus. Again, hit us up, hit the like, follow, subscribe buttons, Instagram at Moving Convos, Moving Conversations on Facebook, as well as through the YouTube channel. And if you want to get in touch with us directly, you can do it through Gmail. We're movingconvos@gmail.com. And until next week, for Nora St. John, I'm Brian Ritchie. We'll see you then.
Bye.